Hi, I'm Toni. Welcome to So Lounge. Today we're talking about facings. Now your very first question may be, what's a facing? I didn't know what a facing was either. Facings are a way to finish the edge of a garment when you don't want to put in a sleeve, a collar, or a waistband. So this is the skirt I was working on recently, and it has a facing in it. So I sewed the facing to the raw edge, and then I folded it towards the inside of the garment. It's tacked down to the zipper and the side seams, and it creates a nice finish around the waist of the garment instead of using a waistband. Facings can also be found in sleeveless tops, necklines that don't have collars, so any kind of thing that you want to be finished, but you're not adding another piece to it. So if you have a sleeve on a shirt, you're not going to put a facing on the sleeve. And if you put a collar on a shirt, you're not going to put a facing on it. But if it doesn't have a collar or sleeve, odds are it's got a facing or another type of seam finish. Now, when I started sewing, I did not know what a facing is. This dress over here is the very first dress that I designed and sewed all by myself, and it doesn't have any facings, and it should. But I didn't know that because nobody ever bothered to tell me what a facing was or how you add it into your pattern. Thankfully, when you're sewing with commercial patterns, they come with all the facings already for you to cut out along with your fabric and interfacing. So I am working on Butterick 4743, which is an out of print pattern, but it is a standard facing, so it can help you in anything that you're making. And my skirt yoke is already made. It has the darts in, the side seams, and the invisible zipper in the back. Now, when I cut out my fabric, I also cut out my facings. So there are two for the back of the skirt. There is one that was cut on the fold for the front of the skirt. And the other thing I have done is cut out the interfacing for my pieces. So I've got two pieces of interfacing for the back two pieces and then one folded piece for the front. First step when you're dealing with facings is to iron the interfacing onto the facing. So we need to attach those two things. So let's go over to the ironing board. So we're at the ironing board and I have my pattern pieces and my interfacing and fabric all ready to go. And the first thing we're going to do is unfold the fabric. So this is my front facing, and I'm going to just give it a quick press because there is a little bit of a fold in the middle. My iron is set to cotton and it has the steam function on. This is 100% cotton fabric, so I'm not worried about cooking it. If you are using a different type of fabric, then set your iron accordingly. I'm going to take my interfacing, and the scratchy side of the interfacing is going to be the side that goes down. When I cut this out, I lined up all of the little notches to match to my actual facing, and so I'm going to line those all up. And if it's not perfect, that is totally fine, because here's the good news. You are going to be able to trim this down. So sometimes interfacing stretches out a little bit, and if it's not quite right, you can just go trim it off after you've pressed everything in and you've got it adhesively attached to the fabric. So I'm going to take my iron, I'm going to hit it with some high steam, and I'm going to lift and move it. Do not push your interfacing, like don't iron it, because what happens is it will pucker. You don't want it to pucker. So you just keep lifting and moving it along your facing until the two are all stuck together very nicely. And if it's puckering anywhere, if it's not, doesn't seem like it's quite stuck enough, you can go back, add a little bit more steam, and then let it cool for a sec because it's going to be hot. And then you've got your facing with your interfacing attached, and that piece is done. Move on to the next one. And this is two pieces, but it works exactly the same way. Just make sure that you have the pretty outside of the fabric down on both pieces, and then you're putting the interfacing on the opposite side, on the wrong side. So get everything all lined up again. We'll do these two at the same time. And we're going to press them exactly the same way. And then we'll head back over to the cutting table. So we're back at the cutting table, and as you can see, my interfacing was a little bit bigger. Sometimes it stretches a little bit, so I'm going to go back in and trim out this excess here. And that's just so that when we sew everything together, it's just going to be a little bit easier to deal with. And I'm going to trim across this top edge because we are going to be sewing the top edge to the top edge of the skirt, and that's just some extra bulk we don't need to have. So just go around your facing and trim off any excess interfacing that's poking around the edges. And then the next step is going to be to pin our facing together. So you want to match up these side notches. Well, this one's still got quite a bit left. Let me cut this off real quick. And you are going to match the side notches together so that it all goes around in the same way. So these two side notches go together because when you pin them, you want the facing to be all pretty on one side and all interfacing-y on the other side. So finish trimming as needed and then pin your facing to each other, front and back, and then we'll go over to the sewing machine. I'm at the sewing machine, my facings are all pinned together, and I'm ready to start sewing them. Now, according to the pattern instructions, I'm going to be sewing at a 5/8 inch seam because it has not been otherwise stated. So we're just going to use the standard 5/8 of an inch. And I have my machine set to 2.5 like always and just a straight stitch. So let's go in for a closer look. All right, so this is the 5/8 inch line on my Bernina. I'm going to line up my facing on this edge, lower down my presser foot. I am going to stitch forward 2 stitches and then go back and then continue forward, removing each pin as I get to it. And then backstitch at the bottom of the facing and finish it out. Lift that presser foot, cut that thread tail, and you've got your first facing all sewn. Go on to the next one. It's going to be exactly the same thing. I have decided to finish the bottom edge of my facing using my serger. The last time I did this, I just did a zigzag stitch, and I'm going to be wearing this and I want it to look nice, so I'm going to just thread up my serger and get going. So if you don't have a serger, you can either roll under the edge of the facing or you can use a zigzag stitch. It's totally up to you, but if you do have a serger, I would recommend putting it on the rolled hem or narrow hem setting, threading it accordingly, and doing this. So we're just going to run this through real quick. And that is it. So I'm gonna, oops, have to go a little bit further. Didn't quite get it out far enough. There we go. Okay, lift that up and I'm gonna cut that tail off. And now I have a nice finished edge of rolled edging just to finish that bottom edge. And now we're gonna go back to the machine and sew this into the skirt. So we're back at the sewing table before we go back to the sewing machine, because I need to show you how to pin your facing to your skirt. So this is the yoke of my skirt, but any skirt, anytime you're doing a facing, it's all going to be the same. So there are two little notches on the front panel of the skirt. We want to take the two center notches on the facing and match those together, and then put some pins in. And you're taking the facing and you're putting the right side of the facing to the right side of the skirt. So it's going to look like you're sewing it to the outside, but then we're going to flip that facing to the inside, and that's going to finish that top edge, and it's going to make everything look nice and neat. So go back to pinning in your facing. And then from that point, make sure everything is lined up. And then you're going to go around the facing to pin the side seams to the top of it and the darts, because you don't want to iron the darts the wrong way. So remember from the dart video, when you iron the dart, then you're going to press the dart out towards the side seam. So when you are going to attach the facing, I always put a pin through that dart to make sure that it's going to the outside seam, and I don't want it rolling towards the inside. So I'm going to do that on both sides of the center front of my skirt. So that's two darts. And then I'm going to come around over here to the side seam, and I'm going to match the side seams, and then I'm going to pin each side of the side seam, because I want to make sure that they stay open when I'm sewing the facing on. I'm going to go over to my other side seam and match that up with the facing. Now you may notice that there is a little bit of stretch in your skirt, and that may have been due to the fact that you were handling it and ironing in those darts, and that top grain line could have stretched out a little bit. It is not a problem. You can just adjust the facing accordingly. Just make sure that everything still lines up. So you may need to pull up your facing a little bit. That's okay. Put a pin in. Just make sure everything is nice and smooth. You don't want it to bunch on one side. So if you have to take out that dart and then put it back in, or if you want to smooth it out, however you want to do it, just make sure that the facing is smooth, the front notches match up, and the side seams match up. So those are all the important parts. And then pin your darts so that they're going towards the outside. Now we're coming around the back, and once again, there's a back dart that we want pressed towards the side seam. So I'm going to put a pin through it as well. Do the same on the other side. And then we are going to be at the center back. Now, the way the instructions said to put in the facing was to put in the facing and then put in the zipper. But when you put in an invisible zipper, it is much easier to put it in first before you sew up that center back seam, as I have taught you. So that's what I did here, and I now need to accommodate the facing accordingly. So when you get to the center, to the zipper back, you're going to notice that a piece of your facing is kind of sticking out. So what you can do is just fold that under. So you're going to fold it towards itself, and then you can just pin it in place next to the zipper. So what's going to happen is once we finish that and we flip it around to the inside, we're going to go back and we're going to tack the side of that facing to the zipper so that everything holds nice and tidy, and you won't have to worry about securing that seam, but you do want to fold it over when we are sewing in that top facing, so it'll be easier to do that down the road. So just get everything lined up, put a pin in there next to that zipper, and that side is done. Go around to the other side and do the exact same thing. And put a pin in. And then you are done. And we're going to head back to the sewing machine and sew the top of the facing. And then continue with that process. So I've got my facing on the top side. I have my edge lined up at 5/8. I just have a stitch over to a straight stitch because I do not want to do a zigzag stitch. Everything is reset on my machine. I'm stitching a straight stitch at 2.5, and I'm going to roll my needle down into my fabric to get started. So we are at 5/8 of an inch. I'm just lining it up. I'm going to take a couple of stitches, and then I'm going to back stitch a little bit. I do not want to catch that zipper though, because that will get caught in the teeth, and then that will change where the zipper stops. So I'm going to keep sewing forward at that 5/8 inch line, and I'm just going to follow it around until I get to each pin and then remove them. And we are finishing up. Take out that pin. I'm going to fold this under here. Sorry about bumping the camera. And keep sewing. We are going to back stitch. Lift it up, do not go through the zipper coil, and cut off those tails. And now you can see that the facing is all sewn in. Next step is going to be to trim this seam, and then we're going to do some understitching. So now we have the facing sewn into the top of our skirt along the waistline. And the next step is going to be to trim this seam. Now, the reason we're trimming this seam is because we're going to press it up against the facing, and then we're going to stitch it to the facing. So this inner seam ideally is supposed to be trimmed smaller because it's going to be an enclosed seam. So that's what the instructions say. We're going to just trim it a little bit, and then we're going to go over to the ironing board. But first, let's go in for a closer look. This is just a close-up of what we're going to be trimming. So this is the facing, and then this is the seam it made by attaching it to the skirt. Now, this is the part we want to trim because we are eventually going to press the seam towards the facing, and then we're going to put in another stitch line to hold this all securely before we turn it again and then have the finished top edge of the waist. So let's start at the other end because it's always easier to hold with my other hand. Okay, so I am just going to trim this about halfway. It doesn't have a specific width, so just kind of go with what feels good. That's about 1/4 of an inch that I'm trimming it down to, more or less. So just go around the whole center edge, and then we are going to press that top edge and all of this down when we're done. Once you have finished trimming, this is what it's going to look like. You're going to have that inside one that's a little bit shorter, the outside one's still going to be kind of the same length, and then we are going to fold it so that the taller one is going to be covering the shorter enclosed seam. So we're back at the ironing board, and the purpose of doing this is to just have a nice crisp line on this outside top part of the facing. And to do that, it's easier if you iron from the right side, and make sure that you are pressing the seam up towards the top of the facing. Because if you press it the other way, it kind of defeats the purpose. But go along that line, and you can press it from both sides. I generally find that if you just do it from the front side, you get it pretty tight, and that's kind of what you need. And you're really just adding extra little crease in there. So it's going to make it easier to sew, but it's also going to make it look really nice once it's finished. And that's always an added bonus. So just make sure that it's going to the right side. And as I'm working around, I have to just make sure, and then just press accordingly. And keep moving your skirt around. Make sure that the seam is going up towards the top of the facing. You can see how it kind of just doesn't want to lie down. That's the point of pressing it. Okay, let's go back to the sewing machine. One thing I forgot to mention is this zipper tape up here is going to be fighting you when you are trying to sew this facing down later. So it's easy, you can just snip it off now and then not have to stress about it. Just make sure that you're cutting it above the stitch line. So that's the back stitching for the zipper and that's the back stitching for the facing. So don't cut that close, but you can cut right above that and just get rid of this little top piece that's a little bit unruly, and then go around to the other side and do the same thing. So that you just one less thing to deal with when you are sewing this facing. Make sure you don't cut the fabric, which is what I'm struggling with right now. There we go. Okay. Okay, there we go. So now we're going to sew in this piece of facing. So we just want to tack it in. It doesn't have to be 5/8 inch, and we're not tacking, we're just sewing, we're understitching. So this is understitching. I've mentioned it before, but I don't think I've ever shown y'all how to do this. So I am just going to line up this original stitch line with the outside edge of the presser foot, and then I am going to sew, and I'm going to start a little bit in front of that zipper tape just so I can back stitch a tiny bit, but once again I'm not going over the zipper tape again because I don't want to mess up that mechanism. So 1, 2, 3, we're just back up a little bit. There we go. And we're moving forward. So we're just doing understitching. This is going to hold this edge of the seam to the top of the facing, and when we fold it over, it's going to make a nice crisp looking edge around the waistline. So just follow the stitch line around. So we're coming back to the other end where the zipper is, and we just want to make sure that that little piece is folded up, and then it will catch. And then we're going to back stitch and go forward and cut off the thread tails, or not. There we go. And now you can see that the seam is sewn to the top part of the facing, and then we're going to go give this a nice press. After I finished understitching, I pinned the facing over to one side and gave it another press. Now, the reason we're doing this is twofold, because I want to get a nice crisp edge at the top, but I also have to go back in and do some hand stitching. So to get the facing to stay in place so that as you're wearing it, it's not rolling up, you're going to need to tack it to the seam allowances, the back zipper, and the darts. So if you don't know how to hand sew, head on over to the using a thimble video. If you don't want to use a thimble, that's fine, but it will teach you some basic hand sewing as well. And that will finish up your facings. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to click like below and subscribe to my channel so you never miss a stitch. And if you've got questions, but no one to answer them, head on over to Let's Talk Sewing for Beginners, hosted by Sew Lounge. It's an interactive Facebook group where you can ask all the questions you want, and I will do my best to get you some answers. I go live in the group on Wednesdays, so check the announcements for the next date. Until we meet again, happy sewing!